In the hushed whispers of the night, where shadows dance with the faint glow of a waning moon, lies the gateway to the forbidden, a tome bound by the essence of darkness itself. Welcome, brave souls, to the third volume of the Dark Tome, where the line between the living and the dead blurs into obscurity. Prepare to explore the darkest corners of imagination. Steel your nerves, for once the journey begins, there is no escape from the shadows that lurk within. So, adjust your headphones, dim the lights, and brace yourself. The journey you are about to embark upon is not for the faint of heart. Remember, once you turn the page, there's no turning back. The darkness awaits, and it's hungry for your fear. Are you ready to open the Dark Tome? Cryptic Chronicles presents Red Water. I was on a business trip about a year ago, and I had to drive from Denver to LA. It was a long drive, and I was growing tired of the road. So I stopped at the Holiday Inn hotel that was nearby. I walked up to the desk and rung the bell. Just seconds later, a man came out from the back room. "Hello, sir. My name is John Shelby," the man said. "How can I assist you?" "I'm looking for a room," I replied. "Are there any available?" He searched in his computer to see if a room was available. To my luck, there was one more room left. He gave me a key and told me to have a nice night. I asked him to point me toward a vending machine, and he did just that. When I walked to the vending machine, craving a bag of chips, I noticed a pool at the end of the hall. A lot of hotels have pools. There's nothing strange about that. What got me confused was the fact that the water was red, blood red. I purchased my bag of chips and went back to the front desk where the man was still present. "What's up with that pool back there?" I asked him. "What do you mean, sir?" he asked, a confused look upon his face. "The water is red," I said. "Why is it red?" He took off his glasses and took a deep breath. "Well, it's kind of a freaky story," he said. "Years ago, a woman was found brutally murdered in that pool, and the water was contaminated with her blood." "Are you telling me that her blood is still in there?" No, of course not," he said. "The water was removed, and the pool was closed down. But many people say they see the pool filled with red water." He put his glasses back on. "Personally, I have never seen it, but I think this hotel likes to play tricks with your mind." "So this place is haunted then?" He nodded his head, yes. I was shocked, not really scared, but just surprised because I had never had an experience like that before. I went up to my room, took a well-needed hot shower, and I lay in bed. I couldn't sleep for some reason. My mind was so curious, and it had so many questions that needed answered. I got out of bed, put on a shirt, and I walked out into the hallway. I walked down the hall and headed toward the pool. It was quiet out in the halls. I guess nobody else had trouble sleeping. I was laughing at myself when I realized I was in my underwear. So it was a good thing that nobody was out in the halls at that time. I did believe that I saw a woman cross from one room to the other. I didn't think anything of it at the time, I just figured it was another guest. When I reached the floor of the pool, I was able to see the blood-red water, even from way down the hall. I passed the front desk, nobody was there. I then passed the vending machine, and I stopped directly in front of the door that would lead to the pool. I tried the door, but it was locked. I don't think I would have gone in even if it wasn't. I looked through the large window that showed the blood-contaminated pool. It looked as if the pool had been closed for a long time. I looked behind me, down the hall to the elevator. I was imagining a scene from The Shining, when the stream of blood came shooting out of the elevator. I had a feeling that I would see something similar to that, but I didn't. Instead, I saw a woman, standing at the edge of the pool and looking as if she was about ready to jump in. She was completely nude, not a single piece of clothing on her body. When she snapped her head my way, I jumped back in fear, and I walked back to my room as fast as I could, taking the stairs next to the vending machine instead of the elevator. Hours later, I woke up to my alarm going off. I took a shower, threw on some clothes, and I walked down to the first floor for breakfast. After breakfast, I was ready to check out and get back on the road. I decided to take one last look at the pool before I leave. I walked slowly past the front desk, past the vending machine, and to the pool. I was still freaked out by what happened the night before as I looked through the window. I was surprised to see that the pool was empty. There was no red water, and there was no woman. I walked back to the front desk where a woman was working. "Is John Shelby available?" I asked. She gave me a confused look. "Excuse me," she said. "John Shelby," I repeated. "He was working here last night." "John Shelby died back in 1982, she said. "He killed himself after murdering a woman right there in that pool." She laughed. "Is this a joke, sir?" "Yeah," I said, forcing out a laugh. "It was just a joke." I returned my key, and I left the building. I got back on the road, never forgetting about what had happened that night in that hotel. First tale conquered. Barely. Still here? Brave. The next story looms, darker, eager to claim your peace of mind. Cryptic Chronicles presents Mimicker from the Prison. The complication that is involved regarding why I am where I am is far too great for me to try and explain, but to simplify things, it's important to know that I am stuck. I use the term stuck lightly as I am able to stretch my arms outside the barrier I'm held in. Unfortunately, in order for me to be fully free from this blank prison, I'd have to grab hold of some sort of anchor point residing in the outside world. When I grab hold of it, I'd have dragged myself out, so the anchor point would have to be of sufficient weight. And when I do drag myself out, the anchor point would take my place as a prisoner of this cell. It's also vital that no one see my hand being outstretched, for that would cause absolute torment to head my way. Why am I here? To cut it short, I am locked away in this cramped cell because I was a bit of a violent piece of trash. I murdered innocent women and children. I severely beat up the elderly just to hear their bones snap. The sound of that snap is more euphoric than any worldly drug that scientists could ever compose. At one point, I decided to rape several religious virgin girls simply because they would be detested by their community for having had sexual relations. I raped their bodies after they had hung themselves. These cases are a few things that placed me in here. There's quite a lot more, but I think you get the point. Here's the special thing about this prison. I'm the only one in it. It gets quite lonely in here, so sometimes I talk to myself. This used to be therapeutic, but I got over it really quickly. Now I just talk because I need to open my mouth. I will go mad if I don't hear myself say something. I usually reach out onto the other side and grab some personal hygienic equipment with me, such as comb, a toothbrush and toothpaste, mouthwash, a towel, deodorant, etc. Using these products makes me feel like I'm a whole new man again. It's not usually after 2 minutes that I come to ground level and remember that I'm trapped here. Sometimes I cry about some of the things I've done in my life. While crying, I like to think about what life would have been like if I hadn't made such poor decisions. I had dreams and goals. Before I became a psychopath, I had a friend that I always thought was pretty good looking. But this person was a lot smarter than me, so I figured I had no chance. But after I cry, I always snap back to being the devil that I am. There is no escaping this cycle. I am doomed to repeat this again and again. That is, unless I can get out of here. Nowadays, I don't really have a particular appearance. I just copy what I see in the outside world, just to get a glimmer of hope that one day I may get out of here. Quite a lot of the time, I'd see someone walk by. I'd make myself look like them, and I'd do what they'd do. It's a pretty neat trick, you see, and it is because people don't know that I'm actually there, that I'm able to know a lot about them. In the past, people have looked straight at me and cried their poor hearts out, blind to the knowledge that I listen on intently. I know the weaknesses of these people and thirst for the day in which I use it to my advantage. This thought is what keeps me going. This is the source of my will and my strength. But wait, in all of my rambling, I forgot to ask, would you like to know where I am? A clue. This morning I tried to reach out and grab you. I'll probably try again tomorrow. Made it through the second tale, have you? Impressive. But don't let your guard down just yet. Good. There's more lurking in the shadows, waiting, thirsting for the unease that only the unknown can bring. The next chapter is ready to ensnare you in its terrifying embrace. Cryptic Chronicles presents Incubators. I was a nurse fresh out of my program and eager to start working. After applying to many different hospitals, I was accepted by a prestigious private hospital specializing in obstetrics and prenatal care. The hospital was famous for its surrogacy programs and had global reputation of delivering the healthiest and genetically superior babies. I was, of course, excited and couldn't wait to see my new hospitals and meet my new co-workers. I arrived at the famous Blessed Wing Hospital at 9 a.m. sharp. I was greeted by several upbeat and cheery nurses and doctors, and my attending was just as wonderful. It didn't take long for me to make friends and fit right in with the routine. I was, of course, restricted from full access to the hospital, seeing as I was new and needed to earn my privileges. The only thing that struck me as odd was the fact that I never saw any patients coming into the hospital or leaving. What I did see were many happy couples arriving to adopt their newborns. I never saw the surrogates before or even after delivery. My job was to tend to the many newborns and ensure that each baby was taken home by their proper parents. It was a very fulfilling job to work with such small, innocent bundles of life. Each baby was perfectly healthy, and no two babies looked alike. It was as if each baby had been custom designed before birth. I only had one problem with working in the hospital. When I was outside the nursery and waiting room, I could hear loud, painful screams of the women in labor. The doctors and nurses did their best to ease the delivering women, but the screams continued. Stranger still, the screams seemed less like screams of pain and more like screams of terror. I had learned to tune of the screams and focus on the miracle that followed. That is, until I heard one woman scream something I will never forget. "Why do you keep doing this to me? Please, I want to leave." After a few months of working, I felt confident enough to start asking about the oddly absent patients. My questions were met with silence and stern looks from both the doctors and the nurses. Finally, my attending pulled me aside and told me to stop asking questions and just do my job. There was nothing to worry about. The screams of pain and terror continued to ring out through the hallways of the hospital. I found solace in the nursery, where I could tend to the newborns, but the screams would always follow me as I walked through the halls. My first year passed with no incident, and I was no longer on restricted access. I could freely roam throughout the entire hospital, but there was no reason for me to wander beyond the nursery or doctor's lounge. My curiosity, however, got the better of me. Shortly after my one-year anniversary, I was wandering the halls when I heard the screaming of another woman in labor. But what caught my attention was this was the same woman I heard pleading with the doctors shortly after I started working. She was delivering a second baby in less than 2 years. This was very risky, and as a professional surrogate, she would know better than to do this. Again, I heard her screaming in fear and begging the doctors to let her go. I didn't understand. Let her go? Was she being hospitalized against her will? I waited 2 more weeks before I finally had the nerve to check out the back rooms of the hospital. I was on the night shift, and with little activity, it was easy for me to slip by unnoticed. I found myself walking down a long hallway with signs pointing in the direction of the numerous delivery rooms as well as a second doctor's lounge. It was then I heard a woman cry out in pain. I had come to recognize that cry of pain as a woman deep in labor. The odd thing is, her cry came from behind a door labeled Incubators. I didn't see anyone else in the maternity wing or exiting the delivery rooms, so I went into room to check on her. I wish I hadn't. When I opened the door, what I saw sent a wave of nausea that I can still taste to this day. The large room had 24 beds, each bed holding a woman in different stages of pregnancies. The women were all young and of various races, and each woman had both of their arms and both of their legs amputated. The women were helpless and alone. Tubes and IVs containing nutrients and fluids snaked across the women's mutilated bodies as the only means to keep them alive. One blonde woman, her belly absolutely massive in comparison to her mangled body, spotted me and begged me to help her. "Please, you have to get us out of here." I couldn't speak. I couldn't even move. I just stared at them with my hand over my mouth. "Please," she cried out again. "They won't let us leave. They keep using us, using our bodies." I backed away from the sight toward the door. The woman cried out to me, tears in her eyes. "We can't move. We can't escape. Please, you have to help us." Fear set in, and I bolted from the room. I returned to the nursery of the hospital and stared with fascination at the innocent newborns that laid before me. This couldn't be the result of such a horrific experiment, could it? My shift came to an end. I couldn't get out of the hospital fast enough. As soon as I pulled into my front driveway, I threw up on the grass and began weeping for the poor women I had abandoned. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing the cries of pain and the pleading for their freedom. 2 days later, I returned to the hospital and began my shift. I walked into the nursery and my eye was immediately drawn to a newborn with blonde hair. The same hair of the woman who had begged for my help. And I knew what I saw was true. I lied to my attending and said I was going home early because I was feeling ill. As soon as I was in the safety of my home, I called the police and told them what I had seen. The police arrived at the hospital and found the same gruesome sight that I had found. The women were taken to a new hospital and my hospital had been shut down. I breathed a sigh of relief and waited for the story to break on the news. But no story aired. There was no mention of the human incubators that had been freed from the hospital. In fact, there was no record of the women arriving at the new hospital for proper care. The third tale's end is nigh and you're still here. Commendable. Yet don't mistake endurance for safety. There's a deeper darkness ahead, more chilling tales to unfold. Cryptic Chronicles presents What My Parents Were Hiding in the Basement. Now, when I think back to the excuses my parents used to make, I feel like an idiot. I remember being 12 years old, standing at the top of the staircase and watching all of the people filing into our basement. Some men wore white masks, some women wore bonnets. But they all had small suitcases, as though there was a bus stop beneath our house, and every one of them looked pale, frightened. My mother would catch me watching from above and send me off to bed, but not before I could ask what was happening. "We're just going to talk about grown-up things, baby." Her voice was sweet and high-pitched. She always sounded happy, regardless of how concerned she looked. "One day, you will join us too. For right now, though, you should get some sleep." But I didn't sleep. I never could. With the images of those people's blanched faces in my mind, men and women alike, all terrified, I would lie awake in bed with my ear pressed to the mattress, covering the other side of my head with a pillow. From inside my shell, the heavy thudding from below was transformed into the sounds of marshmallows bouncing around. The screams that would follow were instead turned into a murmuring kind of one-note melody. One after another, the unique notes of each person would resound and then die away. My entire childhood consisted of this nightly succession of muffled marshmallows and melodies coming from the invisible bus stop in the basement. And then reality hit. Literally. One day, Manuel came up to me at school and pushed me hard against the lockers. He punched me in the stomach twice before he even said a word. Only when he saw that the teachers were forcing their way through the crowded hall did he ask me, "Why is my mother at your house?" What? I neither knew what his mother looked like nor where she had been. It was such a weird question, but something inside of me twisted at the thought of the people coming in. I pictured what his mother might look like, her caramel Latina skin looking pale from the terror that would inevitably seize her, because it seized them all. "I'm sorry," I said. "My dad just sits in his room and cries," he bellowed in my face. He punched me again, this time in my face. The teachers were upon us, restraining him. "Where is she? he yelled as he was dragged away. "I know she's there, Puto. Tell me she's there." I apologized again. "Please, just tell me she's there." His voice was breaking now. He sounded like he was tearing up a little. "Isn't she? Is that where she is? Her name is Gloria. Please, is she okay? Is she—" He couldn't hold it back any longer. The teachers gave him enough room to move, and he instantly pushed his hands over his face, hiding the tears that were coming now. 3 years passed, and I had started getting a reputation. At least I'm guessing that's what happened, because people completely stopped trying to talk to me as soon as I was in high school. Mother explained that people just turn into bad people the older they get. She said that's why, when they get to be full-grown adults, they come to our house to try and fix things. I was just about to ask her again what goes on in the basement, but I stopped myself. I was developing a plan now to infiltrate the basement and finally see for myself. I knew all my parents would say is, "You're not old enough." It always made me feel like I was still a little child, the way they said it. But I was starting to resist. I was starting to crave that feeling that I saw all of the other kids at school expressing. They looked so mature, so grown up. I felt somehow that the only way to get there would be to sneak into the basement while my parents went to the grocery store. Only recently had I found where Dad hid the key to the basement door that was locked from the outside. I had stumbled on a secret drawer in the kitchen when I was looking for a potato peeler. I knew it had to be the key because it had a weird engraving that was identical to tattoos that some of the strangers would have on the backs of their hands. It looked like a snake that was eating its own tail. As soon as the front door swung shut behind them, I launched downstairs and took up the key. I had expected to need a lot of time to rummage around the basement and see what was going on down there. But I expected wrong. The minute I swung the basement door open, I was overcome with the strong, foul smell that I knew could only be the smell of death. There was no light switch on the wall, but I found a flashlight hanging on a peg instead. I flipped the beam on and slowly waded through the stench, down the steps, where the air got colder and colder. I could hear the low sounds of moaning echoing throughout the subterranean passage. At the base of the stairs, there was only cold concrete and bare, steel-looking walls enclosing everything. I stepped on something squishy and lunged forwards away from it as it spoke. "Am I forgiven?" The flashlight beam knifed into an emaciated, poor-looking woman, with shackles chaining her feet to the floor. Her eyes refracted a silvery kind of liquid, as though she had cataracts in both of her eyes. I said nothing and staggered further in until I saw a low red light glowing around the corner. A hearth was glowing hot at the very end of the basement. It was there that my flashlight fell upon something I could never have imagined. A man, just as withered as the woman chained behind me, was pulling a poker out of the hearth. It was a steel rod with the sign of the serpent on the end, glowing red hot. "Forgive me," he whispered to no one. He drove the burning end into his stomach, where it sizzled like water in a grease pan. As he did, he let out a scream that matched those I heard at night. Everything was collapsing on top of me. It was here that they brought their suitcases to stay. This was where they congregated and did what? I couldn't even fathom. A wave of nausea overcame me. I wobbled, almost toppling over myself, before dropping my flashlight and resting my hands on my knees. It was all I could do to keep from vomiting everywhere. As I hunkered down, I noticed a small pool of blood that trailed off to the right. I regained myself as best I could and followed it off to the side of the room. There was a closet, and as I drew nearer, the smell of death and decay became almost unbearable. I reached my hand out to the closet, but something stopped me. Someone else, much stronger, had seized my wrist. I spun around to find my father staring gravely down at me, his face lit from the feeble glow of the hearth. "You don't want to see what's in there," he said. He smiled at me a little mysteriously. He seemed so natural in the midst of this chamber of death. "What is this place?" I asked at last. "This place," he said, reaching down to my ankles and latching something metal around me, "is your new home for the next 2 years. Apparently, you are ready to be an adult, just like the others. You've proven that by disobeying me. So now you too must find forgiveness." I knew I could not resist. Still, I had too many questions. All of those childhood uncertainties were culminating into this absurd place that reeked of death. I asked him again for a straight answer, as he took his time attaching my shackles to a bolt shared by a corpse that lay decaying on the floor. "This is hell," he said simply. "The knowledge has been handed down to us that God no longer has patience to forgive those who sin against him. On earth, man runs rampant like a disease. It is now only through suffering in our physical bodies that we may repent. It is only through serving in hell on earth that we may be purged from the eternal fire in death. Atonement must be made." A million objections sprang up in my mind, but somehow a part of me could not resist. A part of me felt that this must be, if only because it came from my father. A part of me knew I deserved this and longed to be nearer the hearth so I could burn the apology into my skin. But I wasn't as lucky as that man, who died 2 months later and was taken to the closet in the side of the room with the rest of the bodies. No, I was shackled up next to the withered woman named Gloria, who seemed clueless when I told her that her son was looking for her. "I'm a sinner," was all she said. "I must find forgiveness." As the fourth tale's echoes fade into the abyss, you've proven your mettle. But the final story awaits, a culmination of terror that will test the limits of your courage. Cryptic Chronicles presents Fractured. My name is Sophia Radcliffe, and I am a retired social worker with the Ministry of Children and Family Development. I am only writing this because I am no longer working with the ministry and have no obligations to keep my personal experiences to myself. However, I will not use real names to protect the identity of the survivors. I have been given permission to share this story by my former client, Mrs. Sanderson, who is the only other person who knows the truth. In the winter of 2003, I was given a case that would be the deciding factor in entering my early retirement. I had been a social worker for 14 years by this point, and I honestly believed I had seen it all. But this case was interesting to say the least. The 6-year-old girl that I was going to be working with had just been placed in the psychiatric ward of a nearby hospital, and I was to meet with her every week until she was considered well enough to be moved to a foster home. The following information is what I am able to share from her case file, news reports, and the research that followed. The girl's father was a lieutenant in the military and had been overseas when she was born, unaware of her existence until he came home to find his wife with a 2-year-old girl. Unfortunately, Lieutenant Alan Blake returned with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and had begun to suffer from paranoia, believing that his wife had cheated on him and that the girl wasn't even his own daughter. His wife, Catherine, tried everything she could think of to convince him, even going so far as to take the family to get a paternity test, but by then the damage had been done. In his attempts to overlook his crumbling mental health, Alan took to heavy drinking and pushed himself away from his family, occasionally interacting with his wife, though he ignored the girl completely. According to their family doctor, Catherine regularly brought her daughter in for checkups, and he had suspected that she was being abused. However, with the mother saying everything was all right, and having no proof that the bruises were anything other than playtime injuries, the doctors kept quiet and decided to simply keep an eye on them. I remember hearing the news story just a few nights before, on Christmas Eve, about a man who had attacked his wife and daughter with the knife they had used to carve the turkey. A neighbor reported that he had been watching for his brother and sister-in-law to come for dinner, and noticed that the power in the Blake home suddenly went out, and that the only source of light was from the fireplace in the living room. Wanting to be helpful, the neighbor headed over with a couple flashlights and candles, but stopped when he saw a strange-looking man in a suit standing in the living room with Catherine, who was holding the poker to the fireplace while covered in blood. Horrified, he ran back to his home and called the police. When police arrived at the scene, Alan was dead, having been beaten to death with the poker, and Catherine herself was bleeding out. with over 20 cuts on her body, screaming about a thin man that had broken into her home before she died of a sudden heart attack. The girl seemed to be unharmed, though highly disturbed by the events, and was brought to the hospital for further monitoring, just in case. Though, as it turned out, the girl had her share of trauma, screaming whenever she saw a reflective surface, screaming about the same thin man that had terrified her mother. 9 years passed, and the girl, named Kenna, had long been released and sent all kinds of homes in an attempt to find a family that could help her with her unusual symptoms. She had been diagnosed with paranoia and schizophrenia and was still unable to bear looking in the mirror for fear of seeing the figure that had haunted her since her parents' deaths. I remember one day when she told me that if she did look in the mirror long enough, she could hear him whispering to her, though when I asked what he was saying, she refused to say another word. It was on Kenna's 15th birthday that I told her I found a family that was willing to take her in and help her keep healthy. I had been visiting with them for weeks, scheduled and unscheduled, so that I could see them at their best as well as their worst, and was confident I had found a good fit. Mrs. Sanderson had a well-kept home, a 19-year-old daughter named Gwen, and 2 sons, Heath and Paul, aged 17 and 16 respectively. The family was fully prepared for her, adding another bed to Gwen's room and clearing the one side of posters and belongings so that Kenna could have her own space. To my pleasant surprise, they had even gone so far as to install small curtains over all of the mirrors in the house, so they could be easily covered when they were not in use, to minimize the chances of her having a breakdown. After her birthday lunch, I took Kenna to the Sandersons' place, made sure she had all her things, there wasn't much, and reminded her to make sure she took her medication. We sat and talked with her new foster mother and siblings, as it was a Sunday afternoon and most of them were home. They all seemed to hit it off well, and I took my leave once Kenna told me she had unpacked. I told her I would continue visiting for a while until I knew for sure whether it was going to work or not, and that I would be in touch. After 4 months, I closed her file. Everyone makes mistakes, and after reading Kenna's diary that was recovered, I know just how wrong I was. These are just a few of the entries, though almost every day was disturbing to read. February 23, 2012. Dear Diary, I'm starting to think Miss Radcliffe made a mistake when she left me here. Mrs. Sanderson is okay, I guess, but Heath and Paul are horrible, and I'm not even sure Gwen is human. How can someone be such a nightmare? She wouldn't stop complaining that she had to cover her mirror with ugly curtains, and she's refusing to leave it covered. It points right at my bed, and I saw him again, hovering over me, watching me with his empty face. I screamed. I couldn't help it. All she did was call her brothers in so they could all laugh at me. I hate them. I'm just glad they haven't found you. Love, Kenna, March 17th, 2012. Dear Diary, while Mrs. Sanderson was out today, Heath and Paul jumped out at me, dressed like what they think the thin man looks like. I shouldn't have told them anything. Gwen thought it was hilarious, of course, and took it one step further. She made them hold me down while she sat on me. She's really heavy and made me look in her handheld mirror for 10 whole minutes before they got bored and wandered off. He's getting closer. I wonder what's going to happen if he catches me. I don't know, but at this rate it would probably be better than staying here. Love, Kenna. April 30th, 2012. Dear Diary, I had that dream again, about the night my parents died. And when I first saw the thin man, I was looking at the ornaments on the tree, the pretty red ones that were my favorite, and I saw Daddy standing there with the knife looking at Mom, the thin man standing behind him, saying something in his ear. I can see Mom grab the poker and force it through Daddy's head, and keep beating him until there was only chunks left. She told me it would be okay, that I wouldn't hurt anymore. I think that's when she saw the thin man watching her, with those long black wisps coming off his back and picking up the knife. I saw him cut her up, but I couldn't turn around. I could only see it through the reflection in the ornament. That's when the police show up and take me to their car, where I stay sitting by myself until I see the big black bags Mum and Daddy are in come out on the stretchers. In the dream, I'm looking through the rear-view mirror, and the thin man is looking back. Why won't that dream stop? I don't want to think about it anymore. I'm going to go downstairs and get some water. Good night. Love, Kenna. May 3rd, 2012. Dear Diary, it's been 3 days since Mrs. Sanderson said I'm doing well enough that she thinks it's time to take the curtains down. There must be a mirror in every room now, and whenever I walk by, I can see him. I've been trying to cover them back up, but whenever I get close enough, I see him waiting for me. I'm scared that if I don't cover them again, he'll find me. I'm going to go try again. Wish me luck. Love, Kenna. May 4th, 2012. Dear Diary, I hate them. I hate them all. If Mrs. Sanderson didn't get rid of those stupid curtains, this wouldn't have happened. Yesterday, Gwen said she was sorry and that she was only mad that she had to share her room. She told Heath and Paul to help her get rid of the mirrors. They went to all the rooms and pulled them all down, so I didn't have to, and put them in the basement. My medication makes me a really heavy sleeper, and I guess she noticed because I woke up to find the room covered with all the mirrors in the house. They even put one on the back of the door so I wouldn't come out. They were everywhere, everywhere. He doesn't have eyes, but I know he was looking at me. He was looking and coming closer, and he was right in front of me. I could hear him just like I did before, but he's wrong. I couldn't do anything like that. I'm not like my parents. When Mrs. Sanderson came home, she heard me screaming and I got in trouble. She yelled at me. She hit me. She told me I was being childish and needed to grow up and stop pretending there was a monster in the mirror. I hate them, but I can't do it. I can't. I'm not like that. I can't. I'm not like my parents. I'm not. I can't. Why won't it stop? I think I need a nap or something. Kenna, June 19th, 2012. Don't look, he's coming. Don't look, he's coming. Don't look, he's coming. Don't look, he's coming. July 31st, 2012. I'm in the hospital. So tired. I don't remember what happened, but I think I hurt Gwen. Everyone's mad at me. I need to tell the nurse to cover the mirror. Why hasn't anyone covered the mirror? Why is he standing there? He isn't coming for me, but he's laughing. I think he's pleased that I hurt her, or amused. The doctor prescribed a higher dose. I need sleep. August 4th, 2012. She's moving out. Gwen is going to college now, and she's finally moving out at the end of the month, so she can stay with her best friend while they're going to school. I wish I could enjoy it more, but the meds have been really harsh lately. I'm always tired, and I keep on blacking out. I think I've been sleepwalking too, because sometimes I wake up with grass and stuff on my feet. Maybe with Gwen gone, things will get better, but I doubt it. I just hope she doesn't pull another stunt to make up for leaving. September 13th, 2012. He is here. I can't see him, but he can see me. He's never leaving, and I know he's here for me. He won't leave. He can't leave. He won't leave. Please don't leave me. He isn't leaving. It's just him and me. Just me and him. He's always been there. The only one that's ever been there. Kenna had a fondness for writing in purple ink, her writing neat and tiny with little circles to dot the I's. It was a normal girl's diary, except that no one saw her as a normal girl. Her classmates saw her as the crazy girl who saw weird things and screamed at her own reflection. The girl with no real family or friends, except maybe me. But I left her. While the whole diary itself was difficult for me to read, it was the last entry that I found most unnerving. Spread across 2 pages and, so far as the police have told me, written in the blood of her foster family. October 26th, 2012. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday, dear Kenna. It's just what I've always wanted. Mrs. Sanderson was the only survivor, having been found in critical condition on the kitchen floor. She was interviewed as soon as she was stable and had the ability to talk about what happened. The following is the conversation between Mrs. Sanderson and Constable Wilder about the events of October 26th, Mrs. Sanderson, I was making a special dinner because my Gwen was coming home for the weekend, and I wanted her to feel like she never left. Heath and Paul were upstairs playing their video games, and Kenna was in the living room doing some cleaning to get ready. I kept on hearing her talking to herself. Well, I should say, I heard her talking to her mirror. Constable Wilder, I'm sorry, I thought you said she was afraid of mirrors. Mrs. Sanderson, she was, for most of the time she was with us, but she had a turnaround after a recent hospital stay. She seemed to find comfort in the mirrors after that, and carried a compact mirror around with her wherever she went. Her teachers were concerned because she had started talking to it at school. Constable Wilder, and what kinds of things did she talk about? Mrs. Sanderson, it varied actually. She would sometimes tell it to be quiet, get into an argument, or sometimes she would whisper to it about not wanting to hurt, or not wanting to hurt someone. Constable Wilder, and you didn't think to inform her doctor? Mrs. Sanderson, the doctor said that her confronting the mirror was an improvement and didn't seem overly disturbed by anything. He just told us that increasing the medication a little would keep her calm and she would get over everything. Constable Wilder, I see. Please continue. Mrs. Sanderson, right. While I was chopping the vegetables, I heard Kenna scream and loud crash from the other room. When I went to find out what had happened, I saw her sitting on the floor, with pieces of my grandmother's antique mirror all over the place. She had a few shards caught in her hair and sticking out of the skin on her face and arms. There were also some minor cuts on her clothes, but jeans are pretty hardy, and that black turtle neck of hers is fairly thick, so I imagine the pieces just got stuck. Anyways, the mirror looked like it had exploded somehow. Constable Wilder, any ideas on how that could have happened? Did Kenna say anything about it? Mrs. Sanderson, no, not about the mirror. All she said was that she heard something buzzing and it wasn't stopping, but I couldn't hear anything. I thought it might have been a result of some head trauma because of the mirror, so I just took her to the kitchen where I could keep an eye on her and called the ambulance. Constable Wilder, all right, what happened next? Mrs. Sanderson, she dropped the glass and started crying, clutching at her head in pain, covering her ears and screaming for it to stop. I thought I'd take that chance to get the glass away from her, but the screaming got worse and she snatched it from me. I think that's when she attacked me. Constable Wilder, you aren't sure. Mrs. Sanderson, it's mostly a blur after that point, to be honest. There was so much pain that I wasn't really taking it all in. I know she stabbed me 36 times from what the doctor told me when I woke up. Anyways, that's when… Constable Wilder, take your time, Mrs. Sanderson. I'm in no hurry. Would you like another glass of water? Okay then, whenever you're ready. Mrs. Sanderson, Heath and Paul came into the kitchen to find out what was going on with Kenna. They were very fond of her. Must have been worried. Constable Wilder, from the evidence we've uncovered, it seems as though the boys were contributing factors to her breakdown. Were you aware they were bullying her? Mrs. Sanderson, are you going to trust what that lunatic wrote in some book over my boys, who aren't here to defend themselves? Constable Wilder, the evidence… Mrs. Sanderson, they were good boys. Do you want to know what happened or not? Constable Wilder, yes, ma'am. Please, continue. Mrs. Sanderson, As I was saying, my boys came to check on their dear foster sister. I remember her screeching like a banshee when she attacked Heath, and she stabbed him between the eyes, and then she went after Paul. Talking about the deaths of her children was understandably too much for the poor woman to handle. Mrs. Sanderson, unfortunately, never recovered from the incident, having suffered severe nerve damage and is unable to perform basic tasks without difficulty. She is currently living in an undisclosed location with a live-in caregiver and is undergoing intensive therapy sessions concerning her fear of the thin man and the fractured girl she had taken into her home. The rest of the Sanderson family was butchered. Heath Sanderson died instantly when the mirror fragment pierced his brain, and a large chunk broke off in his head. Paul was found in the living room, almost to the front door. and police believe he had been stabbed repeatedly in the back with a kitchen knife. By the blood on the floor, it seems he survived long enough to pull himself the rest of the way to the front door, but was unable to reach the knob. Finally, there was Gwen Sanderson, found upstairs in her old bedroom, halfway under her bed, as though she had been dragged out from under it. She had been cut and mutilated, with 13 pieces of the mirror jabbed all over her body, including 2 almost identical pieces lodged in the girl's eyes. Her face was frozen in sheer terror, her mouth stretched open in a silent scream as her hands clutched at her scratched cheeks, bits of skin under her nails. The autopsy revealed that she had actually died of a heart attack, and the investigators believe the mutilation had happened afterwards, for the thrill of revenge. The case file for Kenna Blake was the most earth-shattering I had ever encountered as a social worker. It's an emotional job, full of turmoil and heartache, but isn't without its rewards when things go well. However, when things go wrong, it can be fatal. I will never forgive myself for what happened to that poor girl, and to the family I placed her with. Kenna Blake, that fracture of a girl, has never been found. Update. I just found out that Mrs. Sanderson passed away last night. She was found sitting at her vanity, head resting on her folded arms as though she were sleeping. They're saying she died of a heart attack, but that doesn't explain why the mirror on the vanity had been smashed in, or why they found traces of glass in her eyes. As the final words of our last dark tale linger in the air, our journey through the night's deepest fears comes to an end. You've traversed the shadowy path with courage, confronting the horrors that dwell within these pages. Now, the book closes, the whispers quiet. But remember, the tales it holds are eternal, and the darkness is never far. If you enjoyed this voyage into terror, please like and subscribe for more. For those who crave further dread, Tales from the Dark Tome Volume 2 awaits to unravel new nightmares. Until the shadows gather again, keep the light close and the tales closer. Farewell for now.